I was sitting on my old rocking chair, enjoying the breeze outside, when I heard the sound. I ceased my back and forth rocking motion, and silence settled over the front porch of the sheriff's station. I had been attempting my fourth guess on the Wordle puzzle for the day, when I'd heard the rustling noise coming from the bushes to my right. It had stopped, then started again a moment later. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or a squirrel, but then a branch snapped loudly, and I realized it was something bigger. As anyone familiar with the town of Hollow's End will realize, it is important to act with calm-headed urgency in a situation such as this. At night, with the full moon glowing overhead, the worst nightmares imaginable came to mind, and my hand went for my trusty pistol instinctively. But before I could grab it, an ordinary-looking dog wandered out from the shadows, and I breathed a shaky sigh of relief. The canine meandered over to the bottom of the porch steps and began to sniff the ground, as if looking for food. There was a streetlight nearby, allowing me to take in the details of the pooch, and I decided quickly that it was a bloodhound. It had to be. I remembered my uncle had owned one, and this dog had the same distinctive, saggy features. Ever since I was a kid, I'd wanted my own bloodhound. All of the adventures I'd had with my uncle and his dog, tracking and hiking, made me nostalgic for those times again. Lately, the urge to get a dog had been coming back to me, and I'd been daydreaming about those good old days. A dog like that would be good for police work, I had thought to myself more than once. Was it possible that I'd actually found my first bit of good luck in this screwed-up town? "Hey, boy," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The dog had a collar, so I walked down as slowly and carefully as I could to see it, afraid to scare the animal away. I reached down to pat its head with a gentle hand, and noticed it wasn't a boy at all. She was a female. "Where'd you come from? Do you need some help?" I realized I was talking to myself. This dog wasn't going to provide me with any answers. It wasn't like she could speak English. But the tag on her collar might give me some clue. She looked up at me with sad brown eyes, as if trying to send me a message. But I had no idea what it was. Then those eyes went wide, and she and I both turned our heads at the sound of someone approaching. A loud voice was singing a bizarre love song nearby, the booming baritone growing louder as the man came around the corner. The dog at my feet took off as I looked up to see a familiar face in the shadows to my right. It took me about 2 seconds to realize it was my deputy, Randy. He was singing and practically skipping along, his hair neatly combed back and his shirt tucked into his pants. I'd never seen him so put together. There was even a chance, I realized with shock, that he might, just might, be sober. "Ah, hey boss," he said, grinning wider when he saw me. "I had the most amazing night. You wouldn't believe it if I told you." I was about to tell him about the dog, but then decided against it. The pooch was long gone. It had probably belonged to a neighbor and would likely just return home again. Still, I felt a pang of sadness. I had thought momentarily that the dog would want to stay with me. I'd had flashes of us hunting down bad guys together, her sniffer leading the way. But alas, it wasn't meant to be. "All right, tell me all about it, buddy," I said, leading him inside, casting one last longing look over my shoulder. At least one of us had a bit of good luck today. "So, I'm sure this will come as a real shock to you, Sheriff, since I know I always put off this vibe like I'm a ladies' man and all. But you should know, I've been single for a while," Randy said, sipping from his cup, his face turning a shade redder. "No," I exclaimed, feigning disbelief. "I just can't accept that, Randy. If you're having trouble, what hope is there for the rest of us?" "Alas, it's true. Things haven't exactly been going great in the women department for me lately. And, well, they had this 2-minute speed date in a van over at Corky Connection last night." "Oh no, Randy, don't tell me you went to one of those things. I've, heard that they're terrible." I thought back to my own date night a month prior. and the woman who had turned into an amorphous blob just when I was getting to know her. I shuddered. Not only did I go, I met my soulmate, boss. It was love at first sight. The two of us left after talking for about 30 frickin' seconds. I can't believe how lucky I am. It beats me what the hell she sees in me, but I'm glad she does see whatever it is she's saying. I nodded politely, urging him to continue rambling. Anyway, we took a walk through the park, had dinner together. We would have spent the night together too, I bet, if she didn't have to work. How about that? She's a night owl to boot. You know how much I love pulling all-nighters? Those are called benders, I thought, but didn't say out loud. That's awesome, man. I'm really happy for you. I tried instead. Then had a sinking feeling in my gut as something occurred to me. Randy was not exactly the most practical individual. Did you get her phone number? Domina, I think her name is, he said, ignoring my question. Can you believe that? How freaking hot is that? Domina. I bet she's into some freaky shit. Yeah, that's a really pretty name, Randy. Did you get her phone number? Or did you give her your number? I was suddenly starting to worry for my friend. He wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the drawer. Do you have any way of contacting this woman for a second date? He thought about this, but then continued, unfazed. Nah, but it doesn't matter, dude. Don't you get it? We're in love. Doesn't matter that she doesn't own a cell phone, and I couldn't remember a landline telephone number if it was tattooed on my left ass cheek. There was already another tattoo on the other cheek. I'll spare you the details, but it depicted Grimace and the Hamburglar doing something you wouldn't want your kids to see. We're in love. I'll bet you $20 I see her again within a day. I said, shaking my head. No more bets with you. I learned my lesson the last time. You and your frickin' abilities. And now you're sober to boot? Hell no. You'll probably bump into her first thing in the morning with your luck. Randy was smiling and nodding his head, as if this were already a fact written into history, rather than an event that was going to happen the next day. But, of course, as it turned out, he would be right. We were going out for a patrol when the woman caught our attention, waving her hand and shouting from a little ways away. Randy! She was yelling. There you are. I've been looking for you. My deputy looked at me and gave me that shit-eating grin of his that said, told you so, before actually saying, I told you so, and sticking out his tongue at me. Lucky son of a... My words caught in my throat as the woman came closer. She was, in fact, very beautiful. And by all appearances, she was also very into Randy. I tried not to stare as they made out briefly. But then I looked closer and saw the tears in her eyes. Something was very wrong. I hustled over and caught most of what she was saying, as she buried her face in Randy's shoulder and bawled. She won't let me go. She says I belong to her, that I'm her property. I barely managed to get away, but her and her friend are going to be coming for me. They're tracking me, I know it. Who is? I couldn't help but ask. She looked up at me, her eyes wet and dripping more tears. I saw the confusion there and realized I hadn't introduced myself. Sorry, Sheriff Parsons, at your service, miss. My deputy here only had good things to say about you. Sorry to hear you're in some sort of trouble. We'll do whatever we can to help. That seemed to reassure her, and she opened up to me and Randy. It's my boss at the lab, Professor Elm. She's insane. She does all sorts of awful experiments, and I tried to quit after I found out, but she wouldn't let me. She told me my contract is very explicit, and I'm to continue working there for the remainder of the year. I was paid in advance, and the money's gone. I have no way out except to work for her, taking part in these awful tests. I can't do it. I'm just disgusted by it all, and I can't stand to work there for one more day. This was getting a lot more complicated than I'd predicted. As much as I wanted to help, I wasn't sure if we could get involved in a labor dispute. But these experiments sounded suspicious, and we could do something about that, if they were illegal. Why don't you show me where you work, Sweet Pea? Randy said, taking her by the hand. I'll have a chat with these folks, and we'll get everything sorted out. Really? Did you mean that? Of course. Now, just give me 1 second to confer with my colleague here about some important police-type matters. I'll be right back with you." He kissed her on the cheek, then pulled me aside and whispered in my ear, "See? Isn't she hot? Dude, I hit the frickin' jackpot. Now, you stay here while I pretend to be all manly and whatnot and get her some street justice over at the lab where she works." I tried not to explode and attempted to whisper quietly back at him, "Street justice? What the hell are you talking about? Listen, don't do anything stupid. I get that you want to impress her, but I'm getting a bad feeling about this. If you start to feel like something is up, call me right away for backup, got it?" "Dude, I got this. Just chill at the station and play your stupid puzzle game on your phone. I'll be back in like half an hour, tops. Just text me the address of the place when you get there, so I know where you are," I shouted, like the parent of some unruly teen. "You got it, boss." He sauntered off, casually finger-spinning the keys, which belonged to the only police vehicle in town. If I was going to provide him with backup, it would be on foot. 2 hours later, Randy still hadn't returned. He also never texted me the address of the place, leaving me guessing at where they actually went. "Come on, man," I was grumbling to myself, standing outside on the front porch waiting for him, my leg bouncing up and down nervously. I checked my phone for the 50th time, then put it back in my pocket with a sigh. I did a walk around town after that, looking for this mysterious lab. Despite asking several people and searching for hours, I found nothing. Eventually, I called up my good friend Muriel and convinced her to let me borrow her van so I could search more effectively. She gave it up begrudgingly, saying to bring it back soon so she could get to the casino later. It was her day off and she intended to make it count. After driving around the outskirts of town for most of the afternoon, knocking on doors and questioning shop owners, I was even more confused than before. There was no trace of Randy or Domina anywhere, and the cop car was missing too. We'd only just gotten it to replace the old piece of shit that had previously served as our patrol car, the one that was destroyed during the whole, most recent, zombie thing. With the sun beginning to set, I returned to the station, hoping to find Randy there. But of course, that would have been too good to be true. The place was empty when I got back. Randy's jail cell apartment looking abandoned and dusty, my #1 sheriff mug forgotten inside. I put on a pot of coffee, telling myself I would go back out to search soon. My stomach was rumbling with hunger, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything all day. A headache was forming as pressure behind my eyeballs, and if I didn't put something in my belly soon, it would only get worse. There was some stale bread and peanut butter in the cupboard, so I made some toast and slathered it on thick. But when it touched my lips, I found the thought of chewing made me feel nauseated, and I nearly retched. My stomach rumbled in protest, and I forced myself to take a bite anyway. I took a long gulp of water to wash it down, the sticky peanut butter clinging to the roof of my mouth. After both pieces had been forced down, knowing this town, I would likely need the energy, I poured a cup of coffee and went back outside to get some fresh air, hoping it would settle my stomach and my battered nerves. Full darkness had settled over Hollow's End, I realized as I stepped outside, and felt the air was getting colder, as it had been recently on these early winter evenings. Clouds were stirring in the sky above, making the mood even gloomier. I did a double take to make sure they were the right color. Yep, still gray. Fallen leaves were being blown through the street in front of me, only a few sad dregs still clinging to the trees at this time of year. I let out a shaky sigh. I missed my friend, and I was starting to get really worried for him. I pulled my collar up as a chilly gust of wind blew down Main Street, kicking up more leaves and trash and sending them flying through the air, spinning like cyclones away from me. Something told me that Randy was in trouble, and yet here I was drinking coffee. I felt helpless, sensing he was in danger, maybe even injured, but there was nothing I could do. If only I knew where he was. If only there was some way to track him. As if on cue, the same Bloodhound from the night before wandered out of the bushes to my right, sniffing her way up to the foot of the porch steps. She looked up at me, cocked her head, and barked once, loud and shrill. "Hey girl," I said, moving closer. sensing something different about her demeanor. "What's wrong? Everything okay?" She barked at me twice more, as if to say, "No, it's not." I went down to her and noticed she was a bit dirtier and more disheveled than the night prior. Clearly, this dog had been out all night and day. She was either lost or a stray, abandoned by her owner. She was covered in mud in places, and her collar was torn. But the tag was still hanging there, gleaming in the faint light from the porch. She climbed the steps, coming toward me, looking tired and lonesome. Kneeling down, I grabbed a hold of her collar and looked at the tag. "Lady," it read, with something else scratched faintly into the other side, unreadable in the low light. There was no way to know where the dog had come from, or whether its owner even wanted her back. Maybe she really was abandoned, I thought sadly. "Did you get lost?" I wondered aloud. "Have you been out here since last night all by yourself?" She barked again, and I tried to lead her inside. She resisted. "Come on, let's get you some food and water. You must be starving. Poor girl." Despite how rough she looked, how cold it was outside, she didn't want to go. She kept trying to pull away. I opened the door and tried to drag her inside. As much as she needed my assistance, she was a stubborn old girl. Finally, I reached down and picked her up, carrying her with me into the warmth of the sheriff's station. The whole time, she struggled and bucked against me. I managed to find some bowls in the cupboard and set one out with water, then filled another with a cold can of beef stew. It was the only thing I could find, and I figured she would gobble it down. But strangely, both bowls sat untouched. Lady scratched at the door, as if desperately wanting to be let out. "What is it, girl?" I asked, walking over to her. "Do you need to use the bathroom or something?" She looked up at me, and if it was possible for a dog to give an annoyed expression, she gave me one then. A moment later, she was back to scratching at the doors. "I don't have a leash," I said. "Are you going to be good?" She glanced at me, gave an almost imperceptible nod, then went back to scratching at the door. Holy shit. Smart dog. I ran over to my desk while she whined at the door, grabbing my gun belt and flashlight. Something was telling me this wasn't an ordinary dog, and it knew something I didn't. Furthermore, it wanted to tell me what it was. I'd always wanted a Bloodhound police dog with super senses. Apparently the universe had decided to grant me my wish. Hollow's End never ceases to amaze. Okay, lead the way. But remember, I'm not a dog. I can't run as fast as you. She made a noise that sounded like a snort, then led the way into the street. Immediately, she began to jog eastward, and I followed after her, running full tilt, and barely able to keep up. After 20 minutes or so, we ended up in one of the scarier neighborhoods in town. A flickering streetlight illuminated our path, as Lady veered onto a property to our right. The surrounding homes looked like combination crack houses / brothels, making an attempt at scumbag synergy. The squat blue building sat at the front of a long, paved lot, with a chain-link fence on the right side, separating it from an old, abandoned gas station. Dark shapes of ancient gas pumps and other fixtures made me nervous that someone could be hiding in their shadows, watching us. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. Lady jerked her head in that direction nervously, as if confirming my suspicions. But then she continued on, unfazed. She looked back over her shoulder at me, as if asking whether I was coming or not. I nodded, and she continued to the back of the building, then sat down near a window which opened into the basement. I looked through the window of the house and saw what appeared to be a laboratory on the lower level. There was a steel table, cages, and a workbench with an assortment of expensive-looking instruments. Test tubes, vials, and beakers covered the table, as well as a Bunsen burner and a small centrifuge. Of course. This was the lab where Domina worked. It had to be. And I had a strong feeling that she and Randy were inside, and at least one of them was being held captive. Either that, or he'd skipped town with her, stolen my car, and driven to Vegas, and I was following a dog around as if it could talk to me. Considering this was Hollow's End, I decided it was probably the former, not the latter. Nothing ever went right for me in this town. Rather than announcing my presence, as probably was legally required, I decided to slip in silently through the window. No, I didn't have a warrant. And yes, I am a terrible police officer. This is not new information. Anyways, I managed to climb down from the window without making too much noise, and Lady jumped in after me, making my attempts at stealth look clumsy. She continued to lead the way, as if this were all no big deal. I followed after her until we reached a wooden door. She stood in front of it and whined, looking up at me. I pushed it open. Inside was a nightmare. There were at least a dozen sweaty people locked up in cages, barely large enough to hold them. They were all sniveling and crying and trying not to make too much noise as we entered. My legs were wobbly and the hair on the back of my neck stood up with terror as I took one step into this holding room, and then another. The lab outside had been warm, but this area was baking hot and humid, with no windows to ventilate it from the heat of so many bodies. I could tell these people were terrified, several of them flinching back at the sight of me entering. "Boss, holy shit, boss!" I heard Randy whispering from up ahead, and the knot in my stomach tightened even further. "Get me out of here!" I ran up to him and saw he was on his hands and knees inside the cage, like an animal. "Domina's boss is a freaking psycho! You gotta get me out of here! We can come back and help these other people later." "Hey! I heard that, asshole!" "I need the keys, Randy. Shit, where are the keys?" A jingling sound caught my attention, and I looked down to see Lady, holding the keys in her mouth. "Good girl," I said, patting her head and taking them from her. "Sweet dog. Okay, it's that one, the gold one," Randy whispered, pointing at one of the keys. "Hurry, she's gonna be back any minute." I unlocked the cage and Randy climbed out, flexing and stretching as if he hadn't been able to stand up straight for hours. "Let us out!" the people in the other cages were crying, as well as yelling some other choice words at Randy. "Okay, quiet," I whispered. "You're gonna get us caught." I started opening the cages as Randy insulted me. "What are you doing, you idiot? I'm leaving if you're gonna be a frickin' Boy Scout again." "Randy, we're police officers. How many times do I have to remind you of this fact? Serve and protect? You can't just think about yourself all the time." I had managed to release several of the prisoners, who ran away immediately, giving me their thanks and giving Randy the finger on their way out. One woman kicked him in the shin. I heard them clamoring at the window and escaping the lab one by one. But then, Lady began to bark. Emitting one shrill cry after another, she began backing out of the room. Then, she turned and ran. I tried to follow after her, and so did Randy. But before we could, the door slammed shut. "You mangy mutt! Get back here!" I heard someone yelling from outside the door. Randy tried to open it, but found it locked. The two of us began to slam our body weight against the door, one after another, trying to knock it down. But it wouldn't budge. "Reinforced steel," said a mocking voice from outside. "Just like the cages you two will be going into." Aw, shit. Aw, shit, no. Why? Why didn't I just run when I had the chance? Randy slunk down to the floor, his face in his hands. "We're done for. We had our chance, and now we're gonna die here. They're gonna do their experiments on us and turn us into human lab rats, and then we're gonna die." I was about to try to reassure him, to tell him everything was gonna be okay, when I heard a noise. A hissing sound came from the vents above us, and I noticed a slightly yellow-colored gas being pumped into the room. After seeing this, I suddenly felt very, very sleepy, and hit the floor with my face as I passed out. The best part about being asleep is you can't really feel pain when you're unconscious. That's why if you're in the hospital, a lot of nurses won't wake you up to give you pain medication. They'll let you sleep through the night instead, except in extreme cases. Because if you're asleep, that means you're not in pain. To get all scientific about it, when you're in REM sleep, your motor receptors are turned off. I saw a YouTube video about it once. Pretty sure it was accurate. But I swear that while I slept that night, under the influence of that strange gas, I felt pain. My lungs burned and my throat felt raw. My eyes watered and my dreams were of chemical warfare and people in gas masks that made them look like giant insects. Insects and animals walking on two legs, in the forms of humans, their faces hidden. When I woke up, I was in a cage, just like the one I'd rescued Randy from, what felt like moments before. My deputy was in the cage next to me, glaring at me angrily. Well, well, if it isn't Mr. Let's rescue everyone. Don't be selfish, Randy. To serve and protect is our job, Randy. You like that burning feeling in your lungs right now? Because that's just the start of this hellish nightmare you signed us up for. How's that medicine taste, by the way? Could you just stick to one sarcastic comment or a basic I told you so and move on? I managed to say, my voice box aching. Oh, hell no. I'm gonna be giving you shit over this fuck up literally forever. By the way, have you seen Domina? She was with me 1 minute and the next she was gone. I'm a little worried she might be in trouble. Shit, Randy, are you serious? Dude, she probably lured you here. This was all a big setup. The scientist was looking for more subjects, and she's probably her honeypot younger sister or something. You take that back. How dare you call her that? Call her what? A honeypot. I'm sure that's some sort of derogatory reference to ladies of the evening, but she's not like that. Randy, a honeypot is a spy who uses her feminine charms to lure people from the other side, for the purposes of information gathering or to perform other services. Oh, like in James Bond? Yes, exactly like in James Bond. Oh, okay, well, then yeah, there's potentially a very good chance that's exactly what she is. But I don't care, I have faith in her. I think she's a good person deep down, even if she did lure me here to be experimented on by this mad scientist. Who, by the way, I can't believe I haven't told you this yet, but would you believe that this... We were interrupted by the sound of a large door being unlocked. A moment later, it swung open, and an enormous man in a white lab coat stepped in. He was bald, wearing thick goggles with a blue tint to the glass, making them appear opaque. Wearing long, thick black rubber gloves, he was a terrifying figure. Standing close to 7 feet tall, he towered over all of us as we stared up at him from our cages. "That's the scientist?" I whispered to Randy, as quietly as I could. But he just shook his head, his eyes wide, as if to say, "She's even worse." My knees were already hurting from the position I'd been forced into in my confinement, and I could only guess how terrible it must feel for the others who had been imprisoned here for much longer. But those others were silent, too scared to say a word, even when we were alone in the stifling heat of the room. A cool breeze came from the far window in the laboratory, and I felt relief from that horrible heat for just a second. But then the man's stinking breath was in my face, warm and putrid. He was telling me how he was going to make me pay for all the subjects I'd freed. "The boss isn't pleased with you. She's going to make you suffer for what you done." I was scared. Maybe more scared than I'd ever been. But I was starting to learn how to stand up for myself against this type of person. And it was paying off. I'm the sheriff of Hollow's End. If you don't want to suffer, I suggest you let me out of this cage right fucking now. I spit back. There was a moment of silence before he began to laugh. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, precious. Hold on tight. We're going for a ride." He grabbed the cage, with me still in it, and carried it out of the room. The air outside was blessedly cooler, with the window open at the back. It occurred to me that despite the crazy shit this lab was doing, they still had the guts to leave the window open for the world to see. It almost didn't make sense. Why not buy an air conditioner, you maniacs? The man set me down on the steel countertop, still inside the cage, and went back to retrieve Randy. A few moments later, the two of us were sitting side by side like a pair of pet rabbits. The absurdity of the whole thing was mind-boggling. And then, as if the whole situation couldn't get any weirder, another person entered the room. Actually, to be clear, person is not the correct word. But I don't have any other word I can use to describe her, and I'm not sure one even exists yet. A chimera, maybe? She came down the stairs and entered the laboratory, dressed in a long white lab coat and wearing a pair of thick black-rimmed glasses. She fit the bill of a normal human scientist, for the most part. But her skin was fuzzy, I realized, and she had an unusual nose and big eyes, more befitting an animal than a person. She had no visible ears, and I realized that was because they were tucked beneath the safari-style hat she was wearing. Yes, that's right. I said a safari-style hat. I don't know how else to describe it. Other than that, it looked like something you would wear while on safari in Africa. Beneath the lab coat, I realized she was also wearing a tan-colored safari shirt and khaki cargo shorts. "Hello, my newest test subjects," she said in a bored tone, around a mouthful of something. Maybe grass or hay. She looked like she had just been finishing up a meal, but was too busy to see it through completely. "I hear you've been very naughty, letting out your other friends. But not so quick yourselves, I suppose." "Who the hell are you?" I asked, my knees aching, sweat pouring down my face. "Why would you do this to people?" She paused, looking thoughtful for a moment, before she spoke. "You want to know why I would do this to people?" Scowling at us, she pulled off the hat, revealing a long, wide pair of ears. Mouse ears. "You want to know why? For my entire life, I suffered in a cage at the hands of you humans. Experimented on, tested on, and then one of those humans decided to do something he shouldn't have. He decided to play God. He injected me with something that caused me the greatest pain I'd ever endured. And trust me when I tell you, I had already felt great, terrible agony. Worse than anything you will ever face." Her eyes were filled with tears. Her hands clenched into fists that shook violently, as if ready to tear someone apart. "He turned me into what I am, and I will turn you into what I was." "Wait, what?" "Your kind started this war," she spat, grabbing something from her pocket and moving toward us, settling in behind us. "And now I will finish it." "You're insane," Randy said, twisting his neck and trying to look at her, then at me. "She's insane. We didn't do that to you. That was those other people. And that one dude sounded really awful. But don't punish us for their mistakes. By acting like this, you're just as bad as them." I thought for a moment that she would make him suffer for that statement. But instead, she just smiled at us, baring her inhuman teeth, long and narrow. "I've accepted what I am. As should you." "What are you talking about? We aren't..." But before I could finish my sentence, I felt something sharp stab me in the ass. And a few moments later, I was asleep. I had more terrible dreams, as I typically do when being held captive. Dreams where I was tortured and vulnerable. Dreams where I was stuck in slow motion or being stabbed. You know, nightmares that I was trapped in a car as it sank beneath the surface of the water in a lake, unable to open the door as the water spilled in and began to suffocate me. But again, I don't remember much of them. Only glimpses, like a slideshow of memories. So many different locations and faces to indicate that time had passed much slower there, in the land of the Sandman. When I woke up, I wasn't sure where I was. It looked like a bright white hallway with corridors at 90-degree angles at the end. After a few moments of adjusting to my aching head and spinning vision, I managed to sit up. Randy was passed out next to me, looking fast asleep. "Randy, wake up," I said, poking him with my foot. He didn't move. I wasn't even sure if he was breathing. "Wake up!" I kicked him harder this time, digging the toe of my boot into his ribs. "Ow, fuck!" he let out, his eyes fluttering open. After a few moments of sitting up and looking around, he asked the same question I was thinking. "Where the hell are we?" "I don't know. There's gotta be a way out, though. Come on." I walked down to the end of the hallway to see what was around the corner. Nothing but more blank, empty walls, with another blind corner at the end. "What's that way?" I asked Randy, motioning for him to check. "I don't know. It doesn't look like anything." Okay, let's try this way." Randy took one step in my direction, then stopped. He looked behind him, then turned to face away from me. "Nah, I think it's this way, boss. Just feels right." I looked at him from down the short hallway. With everything painted white, looking exactly the same in every direction, it felt like we were in a dream. This whole place was so uniform and symmetrical, with no difference in either direction. "How can you possibly know that?" I yelled at him. "Both ways look exactly the same." He just shrugged in response. For some reason, I had to know. I took a few more steps in the wrong direction, at least according to Randy, and turned left at the end of the short hallway. There was a dead end. Of course there was. And that was when it kicked in and I realized what this place was. A maze. A giant, oversized maze. And the scientist, who I thought might be a humanoid mouse, she wasn't a mouse at all. We were humans stuck in an oversized maze created by a giant lab rat scientist. Fucking Hollow's End. Why'd I ever move here? "Well, you were right," I was saying, as I turned the corner to return to the hallway where Randy was standing. "It's a dead end." As I was saying this, I bumped into a wall. The way I'd entered through had been closed off and sealed, leaving me stuck in this little stretch of hallway. I had a nightmare image flash through my mind of it shrinking even further, tighter and tighter until there was no space left. "Shit, Randy, I'm stuck over here. Can you hear me?" It was quiet for a few moments, but then I heard him shout back at me from over the top of the maze. There was no ceiling, but the sheer walls were slick and tall, and impossible to climb without a rope. "Yeah, boss, I'm over here. It's looking like smooth sailing over on this side. You really should have listened to me." I shook my head and muttered to myself, searching for an exit. Sure enough, the walls had shifted again to reveal a path leading forward. It was dark, except for a flickering light far off in the distance. "Keep talking to me, Randy. It's looking real creepy over here on this side." "Just keep moving forward, boss. I got a feeling I might be able to find the exit somehow. But you gotta get back over here to my side when you can. Wait, I see something up ahead. Do you have a door over there that leads left?" I kept walking into the darkness, pulling out my flashlight to see better. As soon as I turned it on, I saw the door on my left, tucked back into the darkness and hidden from sight, like a service entry. Then Randy spoke up again. "You better leave that light off, boss. I got a feeling there's things sleeping in here we don't want to wake up." I flicked the light off. Randy's instincts had been very good lately, and I had a feeling there was more to it than just instincts. A powerful being named Gemstar had recently revealed to him that he had some innate abilities that he had never tapped into fully. Avoiding the booze recently had only made stronger the foresight and deduction which he'd always possessed, but had buried under gallons of gin, rum, whiskey, beer, wine, tequila, and assorted coolers. Now that he was sober, though, it was getting to the point where it was uncanny how much he knew about what was yet to come, making it even more obvious why I should have listened to him in the first place. But at the time, I hadn't known that this place would lock me into my decisions. Approaching the alcove on my left up ahead, I saw that it looked like a doorway leading into a dungeon in the guts of a medieval castle. It was made of thick wood and had a rectangular opening at the top, lined with steel bars. A heavy chain and an ancient padlock kept it sealed shut. "I'm at the door," I said, my heart pounding. "It's locked. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get it open." The truth was, I didn't want to open it. I wanted to continue up the corridor, which appeared to brighten around the next bend. Was that daylight? A breeze? I thought it might be. "The way up ahead looks a lot better. There's light and, I think, maybe fresh air coming from that way." "It's a trick, Sheriff. You gotta go through that door on your left. Scary as it looks, it's the only way out of this place. It'll bring you over to my side. Otherwise, you're gonna be trapped over there permanently. I'm sure of it." My mind was racing, my heartbeat quickening even faster now. How do I know for sure that's even Randy? A paranoid voice in my mind asked. Maybe he can't hear you and that's just some AI rendering of his voice, created by that whacked-out rat scientist. Trust me, boss, Randy said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. He was genuinely worried I would make the wrong decision again. And every decision you made in this place was locked in. There was no going back. Okay, I trust you, Randy, I said, pulling out my gun. I gotta shoot the lock off this thing. If you thought lights were gonna wake up whatever's sleeping around here, I'm guessing this is gonna do the trick too. It's gotta be done. Just trust me. We'll figure it out once you're through that door. It sounded like Randy was fairly close, but it was hard to tell with the height of the walls blocking our voices. Still, whatever was in this room was blocking the way, and I got the feeling it was going to be something horrifying. There was a faint sound of something very big moving on the other side of that door. Something breathing heavily. I took a deep breath myself, aimed and fired the gun, 3 times in quick succession. The lock cracked open with the third bullet, and a second later I was pulling it free from the chain and unraveling it. Something had definitely noticed my presence, I realized, and I saw the light at the end of the hallway flickering, the glow blotted out by some giant shape. Something was coming, and it was big. Heavy footsteps shook the ground beneath me as my trembling hands worked to undo the chains around the door handle. After some effort, I managed to yank the chain off and toss it to the ground. Then, after a moment's thought, I picked it up again. I might need this, I thought. I swung the door open, revealing a dank, damp-smelling room, which was a nightmarish shade of black. Something definitely sounded like it was breathing in here. And there was another sound too. Unidentifiable, but loud enough to be noticed. It was like the sound of something sliding and shifting. Not footsteps, but movement nonetheless. Go on, said Randy's voice. You gotta move, boss. Go. With another deep breath, I shook off my nerves and stepped inside, with one last look down the hallway. The thing which was approaching from the path not taken was impossible to describe, so I won't attempt to do so. I'll just say it was an ungodly, ceiling-scraping shit abomination, which should not have existed. And it looked angry as hell. I slammed the door shut behind me, using the chain in my hand to secure it. I wrapped the thick steel loops around the door handle and around a post next to it, moving quickly to get it done. An instant later, the door began to rattle and shake in its frame as something massive tried to get in. A giant eye bigger than a dinner plate glared at me through the bars, but it would not have been able to get through that opening if it had tried. It was a good thing I'd listened to Randy this time. I began to walk through the dark room, towards a small keyhole on the other side. There was light coming through that hole, and it was the only hint of it in the room. As the giant beast outside the door retreated, I began to hear louder that sound of another creature from within this room. That sliding and shifting. I finally recognized it for what it was. A slithering movement, like an enormous snake. I made my way across the darkened space on numb legs, watching where I was stepping with the tiny amount of light available. At some point, I came across something narrow and banded with color. White, red, and black stripes, barely visible in the darkness. Just the tail end of something much larger. I spun around and saw it coming at me, far too late. The yellow eyes fixed upon me, and a huge fanged mouth opened to swallow me whole. At least that part didn't happen. Maybe it decided my fat ass was a little too big to swallow, and it needed to dismember me a little bit first. An instant later, it was twisting around me. Before I even knew what was happening, I was completely wrapped up by the giant snake, which was crushing me, squeezing me tighter and tighter as it coiled around me. "What is this?" it asked, hissing in my face, its fangs bared. "You enter my home, uninvited? Speak up, little mouse. Who are you?" I tried to speak, but failed at my first attempt. There was no air in my lungs with which to produce words. The giant talking snake seemed to realize this, and loosened its grip slightly.
I'm the sheriff. Sheriff Parsons. It's nice to meet you,
I said, with quick gasps of breath, trying to be polite. I knew from experience that Hollow's End citizens came in all shapes and sizes, but many were pretty reasonable once you got to know them.
And who might you be?
I tried, after getting no initial response. The snake loosened its grip even further.
Sheriff, you say?
Its body suddenly squeezed tighter than I thought possible. For a second, I thought my bones would break.
We don't have a sheriff. Not since Randy quit.
I tried to gasp out a response, but couldn't. I tried tapping on its scaly flesh with my hand, to let it know I had something else to say. Thankfully, its grip loosened again.
I'm the sheriff. Randy, tell this thing I'm the sheriff. He's right outside. He'll tell you.
The snake's grip loosened slightly, as Randy began to speak from the other side of the door.
Holy shit! Is that Marta Cara? Dude, where you been? We've been looking everywhere for you. Somebody thought maybe you were living in the sewers, but I told them that doesn't sound like you.
The snake began to speak to Randy as if he were an old friend.
I've been here. That stupid rat scientist has been keeping me prisoner. She acts all high and mighty, but I swear she forgot about me in here. Either that or she's just scared of snakes, and she's pretending she forgot about me. Can you get me out of here?
Yeah, I think so. Do me a favor, will you? Pull on that door handle on your side. I'll try to kick this bitch down. Meanwhile, I was still gasping for air, trying to breathe. The world around me going black around the edges, as I lost brain cells one by one due to hypoxia. That's a lack of oxygen. Another YouTube video.
Oh, sorry,
he said, realizing he was still suffocating me.
I guess you're cool after all.
He let me go, thankfully, his body unwinding and loosening its grip around me. The two of them started trying to break down the door, as I did deep breathing exercises and tried to calm myself down. I'd almost just died. Again. The door broke down with a heavy crack, as Randy gave it one final kick with his boot, and Marta Cara pulled with all of his might, his giant snake body's muscles flexing. In the light, I saw the snake had to be easily 30 feet long, maybe more. With the door open, I practically dove out into the corridor. The giant snake emerged after me, with surprising speed. Marta Cara's head and neck lifted up to meet my eyes, inches away from my face.
So, he's the new sheriff?
He asked Randy, his forked tongue poking out repeatedly as he took in my scent. His long fangs dripped with green venom.
Doesn't look like much.
I was too scared to be offended, so I just stared at him slack-jawed, reinforcing that sentiment. He started off slow. Turns out he's alright. Just don't present him with any ethical dilemmas. Frickin' Boy Scout over here.
Yes, I'll remember that,
Marta Cara said, giving me one last snake-eyed look.
Now, can we please get the fuck out of here? I've been in that room for too damn long. It's full of snake skins at this point. Those things are all crinkly and disgusting.
Yeah, tell me about it, Randy agreed. Alright, follow me, boys. I got this covered. 20 minutes later, we were completely and utterly lost. And not only that, I noticed a smell coming off of Randy's breath. What the hell is that, Randy? Have you been drinking? He looked a little guilty at that question. You have, haven't you? Maybe. Where did you even get booze? We're in an evil rat scientist maze. It came down from the ceiling on a little string, he admitted. I just took a few nips. Dude, they're obviously trying to tempt you with that stuff. You're our ticket out of this place. We need your abilities. Abilities which don't work when you're drunk. Even the giant snake looked annoyed.
Seriously, Randy? You have psychic abilities to see the future and get us out of here that only work when you're sober? And you decided to get drunk right now?
Alright, I'm sorry. I've got a problem, okay? I'll be the first to admit it. Now, let's just sit here and wait quietly for me to sober up. I promise I won't drink any more booze. I looked at him skeptically, holding out my hand. Give me the bottle, Randy. Whatever's left in it, hand it over. He sheepishly handed over a half-full Mickey of scotch, which I immediately polished off. Dude, what the fuck? You're allowed to get drunk, but I'm not? This way it's gone, and you can't sneak it from me. I know how sneaky you could be, the Randy. What a frickin' lightweight. A few hours later, we were still sitting there, and Randy's powers of deduction seemed no closer to resurfacing. You getting anything yet? Left, right, backwards? What are we doing here, man? I asked as we looked around. Randy didn't appear any closer to gaining back his psychic abilities of deduction. Instead, he looked sleepy, and about ready to pass out. And I had a bad headache, and very little buzz left. I got nothing, boss. Maybe my deduction abilities are all tapped out. I don't know. Well, that kind of makes sense. You said you were clean and sober for more than 24 hours last time. Must take time for your super senses to come back after you sully them with alcohol, which means we're stuck here for at least another day. Randy and Martakara sighed. Hey, what's this? I said, noticing something carved into the wall up ahead. Someone scratched their name into the wall. Maybe they left some clue about how to get out of here. The two of them made their way over to where I was standing to inspect the signatures with me. Kathy Barrickman, Cybard Sands, Melanie Sanders. I went down the list, recognizing the familiar names of citizens from around town. Kathy was a kind, older woman who lived alone at the edge of town, while Cybard and Melanie ran an antique store. All of them had been reported missing. I guess they were still in here, wandering the endless halls of this maze. When we find our way out of here, we're gonna have to make a point of coming back. Save these people, I said, my hand curling into a tight fist. There he goes, being a frickin' Boy Scout again. Randy, these are Hollow's End citizens we're talking about here, not tourists. These people are locals. We owe it to them to... I was interrupted halfway through my sentence, as suddenly a figure entered the room. It was like a door had just appeared out of the wall. It definitely hadn't been there a moment earlier. It was disguised to blend in perfectly with the white paint. A man with dark brown hair entered, wearing jeans, a plaid shirt, and a brown leather jacket, pushing a cleaning cart. He was listening to music and cleaning the maze, apparently, and was currently in the midst of mopping the floor. Holy shit! I yelled, causing him to spin around and pull off his headphones. Where the hell did you come from? Oh, sorry. Just doing my nightly rounds. Didn't realize anyone was in here. Frickin' scientist lady never updates the cleaning schedule. Who are you? What? Me? Oh, I'm No Name. I run a janitorial service in Hollow's End. Oh, hey, Sheriff Parsons. And Randy. Didn't recognize you guys at first. It's kind of dark in here. Martakara? Is that you?
Yes! I've been calling for help for weeks! You always have your headphones on!
Oh, my bad. You guys trying to get out of here?
Yes!
We all yelled at the same time. Oh, there's a door right here. Here, let me grab it for you, he said, pulling out a ring of keys that were flat and oddly shaped to fit the invisible door. As he was opening it for us, Professor Elm's voice began to scream from an overhead speaker.
No, don't let them out! How many times do I have to tell you? Stop freeing the test subjects!
No Name winked at us as we filed out, putting his headphones back on. Man, that's weird. I think I heard somebody talking, but it might have just been my imagination. I can never tell with these darned sound-canceling headphones. He turned the volume on his device up louder, as the rat scientist's voice called after us.
Get them back! Chase them! Stop them! They're getting away!
Her voice faded, then cut off completely as the thick steel door closed behind us. Within half an hour, we were back at the sheriff's station again. Martakara was with us, getting warmed up with a cup of tea. It was the first time I'd ever sat down with a snake for a conversation, and I couldn't help but feel like I was missing out. The guy was a delight. What's up, Randy? Why do you look so glum? I asked, after noticing his lack of conversation. His face had taken on a sour look. It's Domina. What if you're right about her? What if she really was just a honeypot? Wait for that scientist lady to get more test subjects. Man, I really thought we had something special. Yeah, I said wistfully, thinking about Lady the Bloodhound. I had really thought the two of us were going to be partners in crime prevention together. But alas, it wasn't meant to be. That's it? Yeah? That's all you got to say about it? Jeez, Martikar, remind me not to open up to this guy anymore, he said, rolling his eyes and pointing his thumb at me. Sorry, buddy. I guess I'm just off in my own head a little bit. Remember that dog that was with me when I sort of rescued you? It showed up here and led me right to you. Oh man, just like your Sheriff Bloodhound detective fantasy. I've told you about that dream? Yeah, all the time. Mostly when you're drunk. It's pretty much all you talk about when you're drunk. It's a problem, dude. Oh, well, anyways, she ran off and I was interrupted mid-sentence as right at that moment, I heard a scratching sound coming from the front door of the sheriff's station. It took me a few seconds to figure out what it was, and then I was up and running to the door. Throwing it open, I saw the Bloodhound from earlier. Lady. She was sitting on the porch of the sheriff's station, and this time she actually did want to come inside. She ran straight past me, over to the water bowl I'd set up for her, and began to drink, wagging her tail happily the whole time. Then she came over to me and sat in front of me, giving me a warm look. It was like she was saying, "I'm your dog now. This is official." I couldn't have been happier. That feeling lasted for approximately 2 seconds. Gotta love Hollow's End. I reached down to stroke her fur, and as I did, I noticed the first rays of early dawn light creeping through the window. It was morning. And with the morning light, the dog began to change. With my hand stroking the pooch's belly fur, I felt it as well as seeing it. Muscle rippling and changing. Bones cracking and breaking, reforming. Fur disappearing and turning into smooth skin beneath my fingertips. And then, there was a woman standing in front of me. A familiar woman, I realized. And she was completely naked. Hey, Parsons, what the hell, dude? Get your hands off my girlfriend. I pulled my hand back, realizing where it had been resting. Oh, shit, I'm sorry, I said, looking into the woman's brown eyes, and seeing the familiar necklace/collar around her neck, bearing her name. I couldn't help it. Without even realizing I was doing it, I reached out and touched her collar, turning it over in my hand. On one side, carved faintly with a knife, it read, Domina. On the other side, laser engraved, it read, Lady. I always liked that translation the best. It's Latin, she said softly. It felt like it was my own. I read about it in one of her books. Who are you? I asked, piecing it together in my mind, but still missing so much. What are you? Randy was standing with us now, looking at her with troubled eyes. Baby? What's going on? What did she do to you? Her face going back and forth between ours, she sighed deeply and said, It's a long story. It turned out she wasn't kidding. She spoke for hours, until her throat was raw and tears were running down her reddened cheeks from emotion. So, your boss is the product of a scientific experimentation to create an animal-human hybrid, but they made her super intelligent by accident? Before she escaped, they forced her to go through mazes and do other sciencey shit. So, now she's evil and angry and taking it out on everyone else by creating her own animal-human hybrids and making people run through giant mazes like rats? Randy summarized. Domina snorted angrily. Well, yeah. I guess if you want to boil down the last 3 hours of me pouring my heart out to you, and narrow it down to 2 very absurd-sounding sentences, then yes, Randy.
Damn, Randy. Cold, dude,
Martikar hissed. I'm sorry, really, I didn't mean it. I was just trying to summarize for Parsons. He rarely pays attention when others are speaking. It's a serious personality defect. Whereas I heard every word of your trap, my lady. Oh boy. I think you meant polite, Domina. Randy, maybe stick with the words you're comfortable with, okay, bud? We talked about this. Will you two focus for 2 seconds? Domina snapped. You're bickering like little kids again.
They'll do that,
said Muriel, our part-time clerk, from her desk near the entrance. She had arrived halfway through Domina's story, sat down at her desk, and did paperwork through our entire conversation. I had pretty much forgotten she was there.
You should really call my grandson, Jay. He's very good at dealing with all sorts of problems like this.
Okay, Muriel, I called back. Thanks, we'll do that.
Oh, and thanks for bringing back my van like you promised yesterday, Sheriff.
Shit. Sorry, Muriel. Randy looked at Domina seriously. You still haven't explained how your whole deal works. Can you change back and forth at will? Is it only on full moons? Do you have super strength or accelerated healing abilities like Wolverine? She looked at him skeptically. No, none of those things. And it's pretty simple, really. As soon as the sun goes down, I become a dog. When it comes back up, I become human again. And do you remember everything that happens when you're a dog? I asked, a little too eagerly. Randy looked over at me suspiciously, but Domina answered my question honestly. Not really, she said. It's a bit like a dream. I can remember pieces sometimes, but other times, nothing at all. Whoa, I said, thinking about this. Game of Thrones rules. Not really, she interjected. In the books, wargs like Jon Snow. That's interesting, because when you were a dog, you led me right to Randy. You took me right to where he was being held. Without you, I never would have found him. Her face was hard to read after I said that. I'm usually pretty good at guessing what people are thinking, but at that moment, I had no idea. That's strange, she said slowly. Maybe I could just sense that you were looking for him. Either way, I'm glad I was able to help. She looked back at Randy, then pulled him in for a hug and a kiss. Oh, I could never stay mad at you, she said, squeezing his chin. You were mad? Oh, shit, what did I say? Was that our first fight? How did I miss it? It was nothing, Randy. Really, let's just go to bed. It's been a long night. I'm exhausted. The two of them began to wander off, going up the stairs. I called my deputy back for a second, as Domina went up the creaky steps. Hey man, so, how's this gonna work? I don't want to, step on your toes or anything, but can I still... Randy's eyebrows went up as he took in my question. You want to know if you can still have dog detective adventures with my girlfriend? He asked, holding in a chuckle. I looked down at the floor, too embarrassed to answer. He burst out laughing, then slapped me hard on the back. Go for it, dude. I've always been more of a cat guy anyways. And with that, he followed his girlfriend upstairs. And thus, the world's strangest love triangle began. But for now, I had to stay awake alone and keep working, policing the town. Someone had to be responsible after all. I decided to devise a plan to arrest that rat scientist lady. She still had hostages after all, and they were being held in unspeakable conditions. She would need to be held responsible for her crimes. Her partner was formidable, and the whole operation would definitely require backup, and a solid plan of attack. I sat down at the computer with a cup of coffee and opened a blank document for the purposes of brainstorming an attack plan. I took a sip of coffee, then immediately fell asleep at my desk. This time, I didn't dream. Not really. When I opened my eyes, I was below ground. Not again, I thought to myself bitterly. I just finished escaping certain death. Is this a nightmare? The question came to me too quickly, something that would never occur to me if this really were just a dream. I realized this was different. It was like a dream, but not. As surreal as it was, I was really there, below ground in a cave of some sort. It was dark, but there was a dim glow coming from up ahead, which lit up everything just enough to see my way. I could feel the moisture in the air and could taste the sulfuric smell of something in the rocks leaking out. Inching my way along carefully, not wanting to trip and break an ankle in the low light, I made my way forward. There was near pitch darkness all around me, except for that dull gray light which came from up ahead. It wasn't inviting. In fact, quite the opposite. But I moved toward it nonetheless. It was either that or the blackness behind me. The tunnel's damp, rotten egg smell invaded my nostrils as I crept over uneven rocks and fissures. Ducking my head as the cavern got tighter, I stepped out of this narrow corridor into a wide open space. A huge, cavernous room opened up before me. The space was completely open and stretched dizzyingly from end to end without interruption. So large that it was hard to see where it ended. It was an empty void, except for one object which caught my eye. Halfway across, at the very center of the expanse, something hung from the rocky ceiling. Like a rotten fruit, long past ready to fall, it swayed back and forth. And that was when I realized that it was the source of the gray light. Walking slowly toward it, I saw the surface of the orb rippling and moving, and I felt a weight in the pit of my stomach, growing heavier. The thing reminded me of James and the giant peach, except this peach was black and rotten, and filled with squirming bugs and worms. But they were far worse than that, I realized upon inspection. These were not bugs or worms, but hungry, carnivorous creatures. There were long fingers tipped with talons, and faces of creatures, their mouths filled with sharp teeth. Things were trying to escape from that black liquid orb beneath the earth. And one thing in particular, bigger than all the others, began to emerge. The face of this creature was somewhat humanoid, but much, much larger. An arm as long and wide as a red cedar emerged, covered in the black, shimmering goo. It was reaching out toward me, getting closer and closer, the giant hand blocking out everything in existence. I turned and began to run, tripping and seeing the black goo flowing across the rocky floor beneath me. It was climbing up my shoes, onto my legs, pulling me under. My head was submerged a second later, and instead of the silence you would hear under the sea, instead, I heard a name. A name being uttered by a million voices, maybe more. Grothrock. 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 My eyes jolted open at the sound of that name, and at the ringing of the phone on my desk, repeating in time with that name. Lifting my head from the desktop, I blinked my eyes, trying to wake up. The phone should have stopped ringing by now, but it didn't. It seemed like it had been ringing forever. I knew I should, but I didn't want to answer it. I picked it up slowly, lifting the red phone's receiver. On the other end of the line, I heard those voices again. A million of them. A million, all dead or dying, whispering that horrible name in dry, parched voices.
Rothrock. Rothrock. Rothrock.
The old landline phone's handset began to leak from the holes he would speak into and hear from. Black liquid like tar began to spill from it onto the floor. And then the ground began to shake with another earthquake. They had been getting more and more frequent recently, but this one was worse than all the others. Randy was running downstairs a moment later, with Domina at his side. "What the hell's going on, boss?" he asked, looking worried. "This don't feel like another aftershock. And what the hell's with all that black goop coming out of the phone?" "Randy, remember when our special friend told us about how a certain someone was waking up again? And told us to get ready?" "Yeah. Well, I think it's safe to say we have officially wasted our getting ready time." Muriel was on the phone to someone and called over to us. "I'm calling my grandson. He'll know what to do." As I set down the telephone receiver, still leaking black goo, I prayed she was right. Maybe, just maybe, the monster delivery man can save us. I don't know if I can. I saw that thing, and all of its minions in my nightmare. And like I said before, I don't think it was just a nightmare. The black gunk and cave mud on my shoes confirms that. What I saw beneath Hollow's End is real. And it's coming for all of us. Whoo doggy, that one was rough. Get it? Rough? Sorry, folks. Parsons didn't think that one was funny either. But I did. And I get to do these outros now, so tough shit for him. What's that? Yeah, I'm getting to it. Hold your horses, Parsons. Now, if you want to hear the whole story of everything that's happened in this dumpster fire of a town ever since the sheriff arrived, we got a convenient little link that's going to pop up in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen at the end of this video. And if you want to check out everything that's happened in Hollow's End since the very beginning, there'll be a link in the top right-hand corner for that. Alright, now that we got that business taken care of, there's a few people I want to thank for helping make this installment of Hollow's End possible. All these here names you're seeing on your screen right now, well, they're the real-life citizens of Hollow's End. If you want to be a citizen yourself and get featured in a story, head on over to patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror to find out more. Not only that, but you'll receive bonus episodes, early access, sneak peeks, and a whole lot more. So head on over to patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror to become a citizen and help support the channel. We'll be back real soon with more adventures from Hollow's End. And hopefully by then we'll have figured out a solution to those rotten dangly bits down below, beneath the town. I swear, just when you think this town couldn't get any weirder, something stupid like this happens. Randy, where'd you go? I'm waiting for you. Oh, sorry folks. That's Domina. I better run. You don't want to keep a lady waiting. Yikes. Sorry, that one actually wasn't intentional. Alright, have a nice night, folks. And see you next time, right back here in Hollow's End.